Isn't it exciting? Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's an absolute great pleasure to welcome you to this very special event as part of our 70th anniversary celebrations of the foundation of Keele. And it's a day that has marked the naming ceremony of our new suite of research and teaching laboratories within our life sciences building. And they are now called the David Attenborough Laboratories. And it's an absolute privilege and honour to welcome our guest of honour, Sir David Attenborough. As we know, as we all know, Keele was formed in 1949, and it was formed to be a very special kind of university. It was a university model that tried to minimise disciplinary boundaries to make sure that our graduates left here not only with a good understanding of major challenges in society, but also with some of the skills to make an impact on them. That ability to adapt to a changing and challenging environment was core to the aims of the university, and I would argue that it is just as important now as it was then in 1949. Our three new research institutes in global health, social inclusion and sustainable futures are aimed at addressing some of the key challenges that face the world now and into the future. Environmental sustainability has been an important institutional priority for this university, and through efforts right across the university and within, and with a figurehead in Jonathan Porritt, who unfortunately can't be with us today, we have made important strides in research, the research that we do, and the impact that we have, and the education that we provide our students, and indeed the embedding of sustainability in all aspects of our operations. Now, before I go any further, I have a message from Jonathan Porritt. I'm just so delighted that Sir David has been able to join my Keele colleagues on such an important occasion, and I'm feeling wretched that I myself am not able to be there in person. Sir David has also always been such an inspirational leader across the entire world, and his recent contributions to the debate about accelerating climate change and our massively destructive impact on the natural world have been extraordinarily significant. If people aren't now aware of just how urgent these challenges are, then they are simply not listening. The transformation of our campus into an at-scale demonstrator site and a genuine living laboratory for smart energy solutions, starting with a major project on increasing hydrogen content in gas supplies, promises to make a major mark on the sustainability of energy supplies. Other research across the university, including the social and political dimensions of the environment, as well as scientific and technical investigations, is creating a real focus in this part of the world that is also feeding solidly into the regional economy and will have a major national and international impact on tackling climate change. Our work on embedding environment sustainability right across our curriculum creates the knowledgeable and sustainability literate students that will be our future. And our work to integrate a consideration of sustainability into all aspects of our daily lives makes a difference and sets the examples for others. This full appreciation of the importance and urgency of working hard on the developments that can contribute towards a sustainable environment and future for humankind has made it absolutely natural that we should join those organisations that have declared a climate emergency. And I'm able to report this afternoon that at our meeting yesterday, our University Council did indeed pass a motion declaring a climate emergency with an ambition to be carbon neutral by 2030. So it's even more important in that context for us to have Sir David with us today. He does, of course, need no introduction, but like most people who say that, I am now going to give an introduction. Having said that, I very quickly realised that in so doing, if I'd gone through everything, we would have been here till midnight. So with due apologies for oversimplifying, sir, I'm going to say a scientist by original training, explorer of remote regions of the world, TV presenter and TV administrator who oversaw the introduction of major landmark technologies and programs. Program maker who has inspired, informed, amazed, shocked generations of TV viewers through his recording of the natural world. Life on Earth started the so-called Life series that took us all through freezers, plants, birds, mammals, undergrowth, cold blood and land, and indeed introduced the public to a world that many hadn't imagined. Many series and programs were interspersed with these, and more followed on. During this time, Sir David has received more than 30 honorary degrees, but of course, the most important one was the Doctor of Science awarded by Keele University in 1986. In the last 20 years or so, Sir David's programs have taken a more environmentalist stance, including commentary on the impact of climate change over that time. And of course, this is where Sir David's current energy is being exerted in no small part. Blue Planet 2 highlighted the problems of plastics in our oceans, and the documentary for the BBC just a couple of weeks ago on climate change, the facts, alongside the new Our Planet, that is reaching global audiences very quickly through its inclusion on Netflix. These are all highlighting the speed of change of habitats and the impact that has on the number of different animal and plant species. At a time when the younger generations in particular are highlighting their great concerns about the climate and actually making fully justified demands that something is done about it, the impact of Sir David's interventions are truly dramatic and absolutely critical, to the point where the question has been asked whether he will actually be the person who saves our planet. Although I'm sure his modesty will mean that he's about to deny that claim, we are going to ask a few questions of Sir David in a moment, but before that, can I formally introduce Sir David Attenborough and thank him and ask him to say a few words. Sir David.
Thank you all. Thank you very much. There have been astonishing changes in the time that I've been around, and indeed the time I've been broadcasting. Actually, I'm about my career just about spans the life of this institution. You were founded in 1949. I made my first programs about conservation in 1952. So we are of the same age. And things have changed absolutely extraordinarily in that time. In the early 50s, a group of actually big game hunters suddenly realized that the game they were after, the big game, the game with spectacular horns, had ceased to be as common as it was. They couldn't break the record for the kudu that had the biggest horns. That had been established long earlier. And the same applied to eland and a number of other things. And then the penny dropped that actually the reason they couldn't find them, not because they weren't as good hunters as they had been in the 19th century, but because the animals weren't there. And if the penny dropped, that for the first time people realized that they were exterminating species. And they formed the first conservation organization concerned with the world as a whole in the world. And the Fauna and Fauna International is its now name. Let's skip on a few decades. They started protecting people like species like the Arabian oryx, for example. And they realized that actually they're extinct in the wild. And they could do something about it. They could actually get the surviving species, surviving individuals from zoos around the world and take them to a desert just like their own, but in Arizona, in the United States, and breed them up and then reintroduce them to the wild. Problem solved, you think. Except that they now realize, and naturalists began to realize, that it wasn't just about individual species, whether it was the Arabian oryx or the giant panda, but it was about ecosystems. So we started instituting national parks around the world, in the tropics, all around the world. But even that was not big enough. And now we realize that the problem is not far bigger than the biggest national park. The problem now is global. That realization shocked a lot of people. A lot of people perhaps still don't believe it to be true, but it is a profoundly important realization. And the world, in the last 10 years, has at last begun to realize that. They've at last become to realize that we are part of the natural world, that if we damage the natural world, we damage ourselves, because we are dependent upon the natural world for every mouthful of food we eat, for every lungful of air we breathe, and some might say we are dependent upon it for our sheer sanity. Damage the natural world, and we damage ourselves. And that realization has only become widespread beyond the ranks of academics or zoologists or naturalists or conservationists. It's only become realized by the population as a whole, and I'm talking now about Western Europe, in the last few years. Suddenly, people realize that we are facing a global crisis. And things have been done about that global crisis. I used to say the history of mankind was a history of wars, of fighting one another, of arguments. And that was true for a great part of human history. It was not about getting together, about people of different faiths, of different languages, of different constitutions, of different physicalities, getting together and saying, let's sink our differences and handle a problem that faces us all as inhabitants of planet Earth. And that first recognition of that, which required democratic support around the world, was actually about whales. People began to realize that they were shooting out whales. They were hunting whales so mercilessly that in another few seasons, they had the ability to exterminate whales from the oceans of the world. And they got together, nations, different speaking from different parts of the world, they got together and they agreed they should do something about it. That, I think, was the first international conservation agreement which really worked. And that is a turning point. Today, it is my profound belief that people such as yourselves, educated people, young people, around the world, are realizing that we have come to a tipping point. Something has to be done. Who is to do that, and how and what is to be done? The answer is that those people who have the luck or the interest to concern themselves in a probing way with the realities of what has to be done to save the environment are, by and large, educated people who understand about the principles of ecology and biology, and who can explain to people who don't belong to those disciplines, to politicians and to voters, what it is that has to be done. That is a huge, huge advance. And my view is that at last politicians are beginning to realize that they have to take action. What is that action? The key was the Paris Agreement about climate. And there have been backslidings from that, most noticeably in the United States, of course. But by and large, the world has woken up. And another advantage, another great sign of encouragement is that universities around the world are recognizing that they don't live in ivory towers, the scientists who research there. They don't live and just to talk to themselves. They have a responsibility when they get the understanding of what's going on in the natural world to tell people about it and to take action about it. And that applies, that knowledge, that insight, and that understanding is centered very largely on university academic research. And this university is outstanding in that it understands about sustainability. It understands that human beings cannot go on taking from the natural world without any care as to how that riches are being deployed and wasted. So I actually, having been feeling that I was talking into the wind and that nobody was taking notice 30 years ago, even 20 years ago, today I believe that we are on a turning point. And I believe that universities like this one, which pays particular attention to sustainability, is right at the cutting edge. Young people, people in universities, people with understanding about conservation and the importance of the natural world are beginning to influence politicians. What has happened in the last few weeks show that politicians in this country, at any rate, have suddenly begun to realize they cannot ignore what is happening. And that is because of an outcry from young people, because the world belongs to young people. It doesn't belong to my generation anymore. We had our chance. We didn't do very well. But I do believe that the generation that is coming today, knowledgeable, energetic, and brave, have a real chance of reducing the damage we are doing to our climate and of making the world fit not only for my grandchildren, great-grandchildren, but for the rest of the inhabitants of the natural world. The world does not belong to man alone. It isn't there a larder for them just to take what they wish. The world belongs to the whole of the natural creatures of the world. We are its custodians. We have the power and we have the knowledge to care for that natural world. And we have a moral obligation to do just that. And what this university is doing is making itself a leader in that particular struggle. I'm proud that you should have given me an honorary degree. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sir David. We invited from people in the audience earlier in the week the submission of questions. So we have a series of those, largely from students, but also from members of staff and visitors. And so I'm going to sort of invite people to ask their questions as we go along. And I'll try and intersperse them with sort of summary questions of those that we haven't been able to choose. So apologies to those that weren't picked out, but hopefully we'll be able to cover the sort of areas that you requested. Inevitably, we're going to move into the climate agenda, but I think a little bit more broadly about your broadcasting career to start with. And before I ask Bethany White, one of our students, to ask her first question, we've talked a lot today about the inspiration that you give young people. Who inspired you to start, and who inspires you now in terms of what the work you do?
The person who inspired me was the son of the great captain of the great polar explorer, Captain Scott. His name was Peter Scott, and 50 years ago, he was, I think, perhaps the most widely famous naturalist in this country. He's also a marvelous painter. He painted wildfowl, and he had a particular understanding and affection for wildfowl. But he was a marvelous broadcaster in radio and subsequently in television. But he also had a very sensitive social conscience. And he became active in founding the World Wildlife Fund. Other people, of course, were involved as well. But he was its mouthpiece. He provided things for it to say. He provided lots of drawings for it too. And I admire him unreservedly. Perhaps people don't know about him now. Certainly, if a gathering like this 50 years ago, everybody would have heard of Peter Scott. And maybe when in the long sight of history, another 2 or 3 generations, they will see that Peter Scott was in fact the first world famous naturalist to call attention to what we were doing, the damage we were doing to the natural world.
Fascinating. Bethany White is one of our students. I think she's at the back.
It's a pleasure to meet you. My question is, out of all the things you have seen in your time, what has been the most difficult to witness and why?
So, of all the things that you've seen in your time, what has been the most difficult to witness and why?
Well, of course, what's difficult to witness is when we ourselves cause damage. And one of the most dreadful sights that I've seen, yes, I suppose forever, all my career, is in the last few years, when I have gone to coral reefs that I knew a few years earlier. I'm sure there are a lot of underwater swimmers here, and maybe there are plenty of people here who have dived on a coral reef. But a flourishing coral reef is one of the most breathtaking spectacles of the natural world. The mere business of putting on an aqualung and losing the pull of gravity so that you can just move anywhere in 3 dimensions. We're no longer just stuck by the pull of gravity. You can just float about and you do that, and below you there are 100 animals, species that you've never seen before, all of which are extraordinarily beautiful and complex, many of which you don't know how to classify. What is it? Is it a kind of jellyfish? What is it? You just don't know. Schools of the most jewel-like fish floating all around you and taking no notice of you at all. And these amazing forests of corals. That's one of the great sights of the natural world. And I dived on a coral reef, I suppose 4 or 5 years ago. I knew well. And it had bleached. The fish had gone. All that were left were the white skeletons of the dead coral. And that was induced entirely because of the increase of temperature. And the knowledge that I had, and everybody had, was that we were responsible for that. That was a horrifying sight.
Slightly different angle on the same question, I guess, is what's the most frightened you've felt? The most frightened, or the time when you felt most in danger as you've been doing your filming?
By and large, animals don't go for attack the human beings. Very few do, unprovoked. Most of them, it's not to their advantage to tangle with you, as it were. They don't attack you without warning. Even a charging elephant, you can charge you, but will stop a few yards from you if you've got the nerve, and put out its ears and waggle them. And if you are silly, it'll come for you well. But if you've got any sense, you will actually either get into the Land Rover that you should have been in the first place, but just retreat. That's very frightening. But without question, the most dangerous creature that I've ever come across, and which I really was very frightened, is a human being who's drunk, who doesn't speak your language, and has a gun. That is danger.
Excellent. Next question is from Ellie Sweetman, again, one of our students.
Hi, David. In your life, you've travelled the world and seen so many amazing things. Is there anything...
Can you push the thing?
So you've seen so many amazing things in your life and travelled the world. Is there anything left that you haven't experienced that you would like to?
No human being can possibly see 1/1,000,000th part of the wonders of this marvellous world that we inhabit. I could list them off. I'm keen on birds of paradise. Yeah, I like birds of paradise. There are 2 species of bird of paradise I haven't seen, and I would adore to see them. I don't suppose I ever shall now, because they live in a very remote part of New Guinea, and I won't. But, there are wonderful things in this country too. To give you just an example, I live on the outskirts of London. I live in Richmond. And I am told, I live within 20 yards of a church, a Victorian church, and I'm told that peregrines have moved in. And I get up every morning, and I haven't seen them yet. But I know that they're there. And that is a marvellous example of how things are coming back, encouragement and so on. So the thing I'd love to see most of all at the moment is a peregrine when I look out of my window in the morning around that church tower just there.
And now from Eleanor Milosevic, again, one of our students.
Good afternoon, Sir David. If you could only save one animal from extinction, which one would it be and why?
I've no idea, really. The world would be, I have to say, rather better off if the one that disappeared was Homo sapiens. But perhaps that's not the question you were seeking. I don't know. Actually, I was talking about the history of conservation, which I telescoped a bit. And the realization that we were exterminating single species was a very important one. But the thing that followed that in the conservation world, where people deliberately doing what they can to save things, was the realization that actually one single species is not all that important. What's important is the ecosystem. It is the whole community. That's what is important for the health of the world. And our understanding, perhaps it's not our understanding, perhaps the complexity of ecosystems is such that it's very difficult to predict which one you can afford to lose and which one you will lose at your peril, and which one will cause the collapse of the whole system. I mean, for example, in the 19th century, trappers on the northwest coast of America, going up towards the Arctic, saw a marvelous species of otter that swam in the sea, and which spent all its time in the sea, and as a consequence had one of the richest, densest, silkiest, and most treasurable fur. And so, of course, they, being human beings, they shot them, and they decided that they could make a lot of money by selling sea otter skins. And then, about 50 years later, the sea otters were beginning to show that they were disappearing. But also the cod were disappearing, and other edible fish. And people thought, well, sea otters don't eat cod, so there's no connection. It's just unfortunate that we're losing the sea otter over here and we're losing cod over there. But actually, our raiding of the sea otter was the problem, because sea otter live on sea urchins. Sea urchins graze the kelp beds and eat all the young seedlings in the kelp bed. And what happened was that when the sea otters were no longer there, the urchins suddenly began to proliferate in vast numbers, and they were destroying the kelp beds. But the kelp beds are the nurseries where the young cod live. So there was nowhere for the young fry of the cod to live. So the cod were disappearing. The world is full of connections, which we are not clever enough to understand them all. And we can't predict them. So when you say which one we can afford to lose, I don't know. I don't know what we can afford to lose. We can't actually afford to lose anything. We have to do our best to preserve all these ecosystems, because we are not clever enough to understand the full complexity of the natural world.
Thank you. To some extent, you've moved into the space of Peter's question, but I'm going to Peter Fitzroy to ask his question.
What do you believe is the most important habitat and species, and why?
Most important habitat?
Habitat and species.
You've answered the species to some extent, but the habitat in more broadly, the most important habitat, again, that's under threat.
Well, it depends how you define habitat. But of course, the greatest threat that's coming there at the moment is in the oceans. And because we are doing terrible things to the oceans, we can no longer afford go on eating red meat in the way we have been doing for a whole slew of reasons. So we are becoming, or we have to become, if we are to survive as a species, we have to draw a lot of food from the seas, from fish. But at the moment, what we're doing to the seas is appalling. We have become more expert at ripping up the seabed, more expert at harpooning fish, more careless of the ways in which we do it. And on top of all that, we are causing a rise in the temperature of the ocean. 2/3 of the world, this globe, is covered by the sea. We've been raiding it without any caution, whatever, without any conditions, without any reserve, for hundreds of years. We are now in the danger of losing that sea and all that food that it could provide us. So I think the marine ecosystems are the most vulnerable at the moment, and the ones that we can least afford to be destroyed.
Can we just go back to your broadcasting just for a second? Because you always very generously recognise the fact that it is not you taking the photographs and everything else that we see on the TV screen. Are there any specific stories around the extremes that your camera teams and things have gone to in order to achieve the filming that you've been the front man for?
Well, there are lots. And the last series, Blue Planet 2, for example, I think we had 45 different cameramen working on it. The world of broadcasting and of natural history broadcasting has changed beyond recognition in the 50, 60 years that I've been working. I mean, to start with, the programs I made with me and the cameraman, and we pushed off to Borneo for 3 months, and nobody heard of anything from us for 3 months, and we had a great time. And the programs were rubbish. But in those days, you see, 50 years ago, nobody had seen orangutan in trees. They'd never seen a fairy bluebird. They'd never seen an Argus pheasant. They'd never seen some of the most glorious things that there are in the natural world. So even badly filmed and fragmentary and transitory just showed that. And people, the glories of the natural world are such that people's jaw sagged when they look at television in black and white, you know, bleary. But never mind, that was a bird of paradise. Fantastic. You can't get away with that now, and we wouldn't want to get away with that now. Now we have the most wonderful apparatus. And it has made possible all sorts of things that were not possible before. We can film in the dark. We can film high in the altitude. We can speed things up. We can slow things down. We can film at the bottom of the sea and the top of Mount Everest. So we can go anywhere and do anything. And one of the wonderful things, I mean, the shift from film, which was a very clumsy piece of apparatus. I mean, the one I started off was black and white because television was black and white, but it worked by clockwork. And you wound it up, and it was a 100-foot reel, and that lasted 2 minutes, 40 seconds. And after you'd shot 2 minutes for 40 seconds of images, then you had to take the side off the camera and put a new one in. But now you can film for hours on end electronically, and you can film in all conditions. The most wonderful thing, I mean, you can arrange things so that you have a camera trap, so that there's the animal itself takes the photograph. You take skill in where you're going to put the camera, so you know that you want to be able to predict almost exactly the posture of an animal. For example, a snow leopard scent marking a tree or a stone will stand in one particular position because it has to get the scent mark just there, so you can predict just where it will be, and you can put the camera therefore just the right position. And that's what we did. And that was after 10 years, 15 years of tracking snow leopards and failing to find them, of me writing them into scripts every now and again, saying, shot at snow leopard approaches from the left of the camera, spread marks and moves to the right. And the cameraman said, how am I going to get that? I said, my dear boy, that's your problem. But now, you see, you can put a camera there, and if you're bright enough, it's not all that difficult to frame it in the right position. And so you get a fantastic shot of a snow leopard, never been seen on film before. Beautiful animal, spray marking of the rock. And the audience says, it's wonderful. And then you put it on again in another 6 months' time, and they say, oh, well, we've seen that, you know. That was okay. But, so we go on getting our problems. We've got still a lot of things to do, but our skills and the technology, drones, for example, drones give us huge access. Drones allow us, I mean, I've just been filming in Iceland, actually, but it doesn't matter where I was, but to be able to see, put up a drone in any place at all, quite high, with a long focus lens so that you can get a close-up of an animal running at speed and travelling alongside it. Fantastic. Beautiful stuff that you can get. The pictures that you see on no credit to me, as I've explained, but they are breathtaking. And if I didn't have my breath taken away, then I should get out of the business, because when these teams come back with these fantastic shots, I'm astounded and ravished by their beauty and their skill. And the world has never been shown in such detail, with such craft and skill, as cameramans can now do.
Fantastic. If you were to start university now, what subject would you do?
Well, you see, I mean, I can say, to answer the question, the socially responsible question, answer to that question is, of course, conservation of science. And that was what your conscience would tell you to do. But if I was to indulge myself, absolutely, there are whole areas of the animal kingdom which nobody cares anything about, nobody knows anything about. Nautilus. Nobody, I've got shots of nautilus, and they're marvellous things, you know. They're cephalopods. This is an organisation, you know what cephalopods are, yeah. Well, they're beautiful nautilus. The social behaviour of nautiluses, I don't think anybody knows anything about at all. It'd be fun. But then there are hundreds of examples of things like that. That if you just allow your interest not to go down the well-worn corridors, but to go down into different areas of the zoological world, you will find all sorts of areas that people have not the faintest bit of notice of before. I mean, there was an Australian wrote to me, an amateur, wrote to me out of the blue. You would think that you knew a lot about animals in Australia. But he had been filming little spiders no bigger than my thumbnail, which are called peacock spiders. And they inflate their abdomens. And when they inflate them, they are just as richly patterned as the tails of peacocks. And they display. But they're individually varied, much more varied than peacocks are. Wonderful little creatures, no bigger than that. And he discovered them. He sent amateur film to me, and I said, wonderful. And as a consequence, they're now, again, one of these hackneyed things. Oh, peacock spiders again, we're spelling them. I've shown it about 3 or 4 times. I get quite bewitched by peacock spiders. I mean, they're most extraordinary, wonderfully beautiful creatures, and we don't know anything about them, really.
So plenty to do. Plenty to do. I'm going to suggest that we take the next 3 questions as a group and that you answer them all after the third one. So the first one is from Catherine Bailey.
Good afternoon, sir. As a new mother, I would like to know what 3 things you would ask every parent to teach their children in order to make the biggest difference for their future on planet Earth.
Okay. Then the next one is Annabelle Roberts.
Thank you, Davey, for your talk. So my question is, so sustainability can be individual and large scale. How important do you think veganism is in combating climate change, and what do you think about the movement?
And then the third one from Annabelle Machin, please. No? Annabelle's not here. So I'm going to ask Annabelle's question. She said, since graduating from Keele University, I have worked as a doctor in the NHS. Over this short period of time, continuing medical advancements have contributed to longer life expectancies in the developed world and an increasing global population. Do we need to be having frank conversations about how many people our Earth can sustain in the future? So 3 slightly different aspects of the same thing.
Yes, I forgot. What was the first one?
So the first one was advice to a new mother. The second one specifically on veganism, and then the third one on population.
Yeah. Well, I think what I would say to a mother, particularly in the Western European situation, is think how many children you want. Advising people on how many children they have is a very impertinent thing to do. It's the great inalienable right of Homo sapiens to decide how many children they have, and if they have 10 children. But human beings are extraordinary in the amount of care that each child needs to be brought up. But we can't, I mean, in the Victorian times, you know, medical conditions were such that women in this country could have 20 children in their lifetime, of whom 3/4 perhaps would die. Well, that no longer happens. Now medical science is such that we can, our children when they're born have got a very, very, very good chance of survival. And I think one should think about carefully about how many you can have to replace the parents. This country is full of human beings, and the natural world has suffered as a consequence as the human beings take what they want from the natural world. That can't go on. Sustainability, which is one of the mottos, one of the headlines of this university, makes it perfectly clear that sustaining the size of our population is fine, but allowing it to increase at a substantial rate is not tolerable in this small country. But each person has to make that decision by themselves. What was the last question?
It was population veganism.
Veganism.
It was one in the...
Yes, well, we can't afford to give great slabs of the land to other mammals that we're going to eat. I don't have any problems about the biological morality, if that makes sense, the biological morality of eating flesh, because as a biologist, and you are many here, we recognize that our dentition and our digestive system are those of an omnivore. And we have carnassial, we have teeth which are good for masticating and tearing flesh. So if there is such a thing as a biological morality, I think we're justified in eating. But we can't afford to go on eating flesh if in order to provide for that appetite we are taking up whole areas of the natural world which the natural world needs. So the amount of the fertile land surface which we devote to raising cattle and sheep can no longer be sustained, because we need that ground in order to grow crops. So I myself have now given up largely eating flesh, not for moral reasons, I have to say, but or not even because it's just for some reason or other, I don't know, it's to do with age, but I don't eat much meat. I don't want to eat much meat. I don't think it is morally wrong to eat flesh every now and again, but I don't want to do so.
Okay, thank you. Next question from one of our staff, Emma Henderson.
Oh, hello. Good afternoon. I was wondering if you were able to introduce a new law today in the UK in order to tackle climate change, what would that be?
A new law. If you were able to introduce a new law in the UK.
Well, it depends what the law is, of course. But I'm sure that the time has come when we should legislate for certain things, and unless we can get it done voluntarily. If we can get it done, I mean, persuasion is much better than the law, and we have a responsibility to persuade people that they can't afford to go on doing certain things which are damaging the environment. We already take that. This recent law about car exhausts, for example. I mean, that is damaging the environment. That is also poisoning children, poisoning adults too, poisoning people who live in cities. Yes, we have to put laws for those sort of things. I'm not a great legal man. I don't feel that we want to keep on imposing more and more laws. I want persuasion is much better than the law, and we should persuade people that actually they'll be healthier if they stop poisoning the atmosphere. And I'm trying to think of what laws that anybody might propose that I would find intolerable. But certainly the less laws, the better, and the more persuasion that we can of proper living. You know, I feel that we are on the edge of a moral change in human society, and that one that is coming in at such a speed we almost may not recognize it. But there was a time in the middle of the 19th century when civilized, educated European people thought it was perfectly acceptable to own another human being as a slave and to buy and sell them as slaves. And in a period of about 25 years, suddenly it became intolerable for any educated, civilized human being to tolerate such an abomination. How that happened, I don't know. I mean, you can name names, William Wilberforce, they're politicians and so on. But it was not just politicians. the world began to recognize that was intolerable. I have just a suspicion that we are on the verge of feeling just that sort of way about intolerable it would be to maltreat the planet in the way in which we have been maltreating the planet. I suspect that we're on the edge of a moral revolution, certainly in Western Europe. And I only pray that that's true.
Okay, and then a question from Job Elwell.
Good afternoon, David. Considering that climate change is perhaps the contemporary world's greatest threat, but also how entrenched in our ways as a society humans can be, how optimistic are you that we will realistically be able to take the necessary steps towards creating a sustainable society before the irreversible effects of climate change take hold?
I can't pretend I'm that optimistic. I've been too appalled by seeing some of the dreadful things that we're doing. But I do know, as I've just said, that I have the feeling that we are on the verge of a profound change in attitude, certainly in Western Europe, and I hope elsewhere in the world. And what chance of that happening? I think we are doomed for the natural world to be damaged to some further degree, whatever happens. But I think there is just a chance that realization of this and education and the spreading of a realization of it will be such that we may be able to avoid its worst excesses. And as we know, we're at that cutting point now. It's not just, oh yes, in the next 150 years. If we don't deal with climate change in the next 20 years, solid academic scientific assessment is that there will be major climatic disruption, which will have devastating effect on our cities, devastating effect on the political situations in many of the continents of the world, and desertification of great areas that were once fertile, and cities, whole of Florida, will be underwater. That could happen. I'm not saying it will, but it could, unless the movement which I detect actually proves to be a powerful movement and spreads quickly. So I think we have a chance, but actually it's your future, and everybody in this room will be involved in coping with what the rest of the world does. Everyone.
Thank you, Sir David. That's the end of the questions. Before I give the formal vote of thanks, I'd like to invite a couple of our students, Vincy and Catherine, I think, just to come up with a couple of gifts for you from Keele University. They're coming from.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much indeed. Well, I'm sure that I'll stand between you.
Okay, perfect.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, we certainly haven't been disappointed. I'd like to remind you that of the people who watched BBC's Blue Planet 2, 88% of them said that they had changed their personal habits with respect to plastics. I think that shows the power of the gentleman that we have in the room with us today. And I'm not going to say any more other than just to give my great thanks to all of those who have gone to help organise today. We really have put Sir David through his paces. We are very, very appreciative, and we do acknowledge, and he does talk about his age, he has a birthday next week. So we're very grateful that he's taken the time to come and see us this week and work so hard for us today. But it's taken an awful lot of people to actually organise today, and it's gone like clockwork. It has been fantastic. So thank you to all of you who are either in the room or watching potentially on the video screen, including at least one who's in the Canary Islands at the moment, who's my PA that Sir David has been dealing with over the last 2 or 3 weeks. So it just remains to say a huge thank you to all of you that have come here today. We've heard about some very important aspects of our lives, of the life of our planet. But of course, most importantly, I'd like you to join me in thanking Sir David Attenborough for honouring us with his presence today.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you very much.